right, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming down tonight. We are live from Books and Books in Coral Gables, Florida. So for those of you watching on the internet at home, if at any time during tonight's presentation you'd like to purchase a copy of tonight's book, you can just call the number on your screen. We will have the author sign it for you, and we will ship it to wherever you are in the United States free of charge. Well, this evening, Books and Books is very happy to welcome Ms. Mandee Heller Adler and her new book, From Public School to the Ivy League, How to Get into a Top School Without Top Dollar Resources. And her co-author, Amy Heller, is also joining us in the house here tonight. Ms. Adler graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with honors and 2 degrees before receiving an MBA from Harvard Business School. She is the founder and principal of International College Counselors, one of the world's largest and most successful college and graduate school admissions counseling businesses. In this book, she shows us the tools and resources you need to gain admission to the elite universities without first having to pay for a private school education. Here to tell us more about it, please give a very warm welcome to Ms. Mandee Heller Adler.
Hi, just want to say thank you all for coming, and for anyone watching on the internet, thanks for watching. I just want to start out with my story to help explain how I got here and hopefully inspire any achieving or aspiring Ivy League students to know that they can make it, and just requires a little bit of hard work, and it really doesn't matter whether you go to private school or public school. So I was one of 2 students in a class of 550 who went to an Ivy League school from a terrific public school in Miami Beach. So I went to Beach High, for any of you familiar with Miami Beach High School. It wasn't that other students didn't want to or didn't deserve to. They were presidents of clubs, captains of teams, nationally ranked in science, music, or debate, in the top 10 of our class, or had a combination of many achievements. But the Ivies said no. It just fit the pattern. For many years at my school, less than a handful of kids would go to the Ivy League, even though many who deserved to go applied. While I was obviously thrilled with my own accomplishment, acceptance to the University of Pennsylvania, I was surprised by the disproportionate number of acceptances that went to students at our neighboring private school, which at the time was Ransom Everglades, which still exists right here around the corner. While only 2 students received Ivy acceptances from my high school of 550, 10 students got accepted to Penn alone from the smaller private school. When I went to college, I remember wondering why so many of those students were there, especially on nights when I was tutoring them in subjects like economics. Clearly, these students came from higher income families, but I was fairly certain that that did not really correspond to higher intellect. But the private school kids had it different. They had to have it different. But what was the real difference that made it different? They didn't score higher on the AP tests or have pre-knowledge of the SATs. We all took the same classes as the private school students, and in some cases we even took more APs. And we received the same accolades in national academic competitions. But why did it seem that our fellow public school students didn't get past the Ivy admissions gates? What did these students have that my classmates did not? What did they know that we did not? I was determined to figure it out. I gathered the data, analyzed it, and even met with the superintendent of the Miami-Dade public school system and other education experts. My interest in college admissions eventually landed me in the CEO seat, running a global college counseling business that helps students from all over the world find and get into college and graduate school. Of course, working in college counseling, I've heard all kinds of rumors about college admissions. From the highly doubtful, my friend's cousin got accepted to Harvard with a 3.0 GPA due to a fabulous essay, to the factually incorrect. The SAT starts to average the scores after 3 times. But another claim I often hear is that students from private schools have a more difficult curriculum, are better students, and therefore deserve to get into better colleges. And while there's possibly a disproportionate number of private school students in top schools, I do not believe that the quality of private school curricula or student body to be the primary reasons for such acceptances. So what made their chances of getting into an Ivy League school higher? After much travel and thought, a conclusion was drawn. The private school students enjoyed a much higher counselor per student ratio. In other words, they were informed, and informed early about the college admissions process. So getting into the college of your dreams comes not from wealth, but from understanding the admissions process and committing yourself to maximizing your academic and extracurricular opportunities. As with most things, knowledge is power. So this book, that hopefully some of you will buy, is The Great Equalizer. You can still succeed and get into the school of your dreams without private school tuition. And I just want to take a little break and say that 3 sisters who all went to a Title I public school to their first choice college created this book. I set my heart early in an Ivy League, but the others 2 didn't want to. My oldest sister, sitting in the back, who helped write this book, went to Boston University, a top school in the country for advertising, which was her dream career. She became a copywriter, then a creative director at a major New York advertising agency, and her writing made this all possible. My youngest sister, a nationally ranked athlete, was co-founder and captain of the University of Florida's women's water polo team and in the honors program. For anyone who knows water polo and academics, that's no joke. She took her competitive drive to find the publisher and help with the editing. It was a family affair, as has been all of my greatest achievements. So with that in mind, I just wanted to lay out a few things that I want everyone to know when it comes to college admissions. But first, I'm trying to look around. I see that you're a teenager and you're probably in high school. What grade are you in? 11th, okay. Do you have any other teenager? Everyone else is a parent of either an aspiring student or, yeah? You have a child looking to get into college? Just trying to figure out the ages? Graduate school, okay. Okay. So I wanted to walk through the admissions hierarchy just to help everyone to understand what are the key things you need to know as far as getting into college. I do understand that college is a very, very personal process, and it's very individual, which is an advantage that students have when working with a private counselor, for example. But what I want to take out of this book is to look at and pick out those things that feel most authentic for your student or make the most sense for your student, because at the end of the day, everyone's path should be different, right? So here's the admissions hierarchy. The first most important thing is, does anyone know? GPA, that's right. So the strength of the curriculum, the high school courses, the grades, extremely important. So especially when we're looking for Ivy League schools, when kids are asking me what's the most important thing, it's the grades. So when people give you the stories like, oh, I had a friend whose cousin got the 3.0, a brother's nephew had a 2.7, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've never seen it happen. I mean, you can donate a lot of money, and a lot of things can make up for that. But for the most part, even if you give a ton of money, grades are still important at the Ivy League schools. I mean, there is a base. So the grades are the most important. And runner-up to that is the challenging courses. So it's great if you get all A's in very easy or mediocre classes. But at the end of the day, the Ivy League schools are looking for kids who take rigorous curriculum and then they get good grades. So when I talk to students and families and the kids say, I'm so stressed out, I'm in 17 clubs and I'm playing sports and all kinds of stuff. If your goal is to get into a good school, the most important thing is your grades in school, right? The other stuff is nice, but ultimately you're applying to get into a school. And so the thing that they value the most is your academic drive and your academic abilities. Whether that should or should not be the case is a whole different matter of discussion, but once again, you're applying to a school, so grades are the most important. The second thing I would say is actually the standardized tests, which I dislike immensely, and I think there is absolutely no correlation between intellect and standardized tests. No offense to anyone who's a really good test taker, but unfortunately they count for the college admissions process. One thing I do know is that you can study for these tests. So one of the reasons the top kids tend to do well on these tests is because those are the same kids who actually spend the time to study. I mean, there are those people who naturally do well on tests, and we all hate them. But, for the most part, the students that I work with work pretty hard, and you can improve your scores just by studying. There's a new SAT that's coming out next year. I think the SAT has finally caught on to the fact that they're not reflective of what the kids are learning in school anymore. So that'll be interesting to see what it looks like. Right now, I recommend that all my students take the ACT instead of the SAT because it does seem to be more reflective of what the kids are learning. So if anyone has a student who's deciding, I certainly recommend that they take the ACT. There is a lot of false information out there, especially among tutors who don't know how to teach the ACT as to whether or not the ACT is as important. So that's actually a big red flag if you are looking to find a tutor and the tutor says, oh no, the ACT is not a good test. That usually means they just don't know how to teach the ACT. Because most tutors who know both feel the ACT is just at least right now, this year's version is a better test. And then next year we'll see what happens with the SAT. That said, what I don't want students to do is to stress about getting an extra 10 points or to stress about an extra point. 2 years ago, I had a girl who got a 35 out of 36 on the ACT, and she felt she had to take it again. As far as I was concerned, that was a waste of a Saturday. No college is going to say, oh, you got a 35 instead of a 36, we're not going to accept you. It's the same, difference, and when kids are spending all of their time studying for standardized tests, I just think that's a big waste. But there are bands. I mean, if you want to go to a top Ivy League school, you do need to get at least a 32 or a 33 on your ACT or 750 and above on your SATs. Once again, I didn't say it was fair, but it certainly is the reality. Yeah.
What about GRE? Since I'm already...
Yeah, there still are bands for the GREs. So it just, certain schools want certain scores, and I think the graduate schools are a little less dependent on the standardized tests, I think, but they still exist and you still have to take them. I find the kids study a lot less for them, so if you study, you can usually do pretty well. It's kind of a last-minute thought for a lot of graduate school students, and they just take it. So if you know that you want to take it and you study for it, I think it's a good idea. It could make a big difference. Standardized tests are also a lot of times tied to scholarships. So students want to make sure that they do well on the standardized tests as far as scholarships are concerned. As I said, it's my least favorite part of the college admissions process. The next piece that a lot of the seniors are working on right now are the college essays. I think those are very important because they really allow a student to tell their story. I don't think they make up for bad grades or make up for low SAT scores, so I don't think that exists. But I heard the admissions officer from Stanford speak, a couple months ago. And what he said was that, 80% of the students who applied to Stanford had the grades and test scores. So 80%. So the next question is, well, who's the 6% who gets in, right? And I think that really comes down to the extracurriculars and then also the way the child presents him or herself in the essays. The biggest mistake that parents can make is writing the essays for the kids, because when you read the essays enough times, you can hear a 17-year-old's voice or not. They just don't write that well. I mean, some of them write well, but they don't write as well as a 40-year-old. And if you're, one of the things people hire me for, they're like, wow, you're a really good writer. And I'm like, I know, and I write better than probably almost any 17-year-old out there, but you really don't want me writing, or any adult writing, your kid's essay. You want it reviewed a lot of times. You might want to work with the kid as far as the tone and the direction, and maybe even the content, right? I just read there's a kid I'm working with, and he wants to apply to MIT, and he has the grades and the test scores. He's a great kid. He's going to get into MIT. And one of the questions they ask is it's to tell us some of your favorite songs. And he picked all these racy, sexual songs. And I'm like, that's just not what the college is looking for. And it doesn't make him not a smart kid, and doesn't mean he's not going to be a great contributor at MIT, but I think sometimes the 17-year-olds might have not the best judgment all the time. So that's where the adults can come in and say, why don't we think of something that might be more reflective of who you are as compared to what you hear on the radio and maybe, like to dance to or something. So that's kind of the relationship I love for families to have with their kids when it comes to their essays and their choice of favorite songs and such. The next piece, which I'm actually going to spend an awful lot of time on after this, is college fit. I think that's the most important piece to all of this, right? So if you are the right fit for the school when it comes to what they're looking for in a student, when it comes to grades, when it comes to test scores, when it comes to just how you how you fit into the school, who you are. Like, for example, with my sister, when she was applying to BU, when we were in high school, she was an amazing writer, an amazing illustrator. So for a school that had an advertising program, it really was a no-brainer, right? I mean, she fit in perfectly. She wrote the essay and said, I mean, not that I remember you writing your essay, but I'm assuming it said something along the lines of, you know, I really want to do advertising. Here's an example of all of the cartoons that I've done, and here's an example of some of the things that I've written, and here are my, you know, and the school says, you know, that makes perfect sense, right? So terrific. And when that happens, it works out really well. I actually spent my morning reading essays for a school called Tufts. Tufts is a very distinct student body. And they actually ask in the application, you know, why Tufts in 50 to 100 words. There's a student that goes to Tufts, and when you go visit, you kind of know. And that's one disadvantage that Florida families have, and also public school families, so they make it a little bit harder to go visit, right? It's not like just hop in our car and go see all these great schools in New England. But if you can take the time to get to know the different schools, it can be a huge advantage not only to you as an applicant, because you know what you're getting into, but also from the school, because usually the applications do reflect a type of student. I never recommend that a student apply to all of the Ivy League schools, because as far as I'm concerned, that just means they haven't done their homework, right? I mean, there's just a big difference between a school like Brown, for anyone that knows Brown, which is, you know, an open curriculum, and the kids get to chart their own path, and there's pass-fail, and, you know, that's a type of student that is so intellectually curious that they are willing, that they really want to explore all kinds of things, to a school like Wharton, for example, where the kids all want to, you know, work on Wall Street and are very directed as to what they want to do. It doesn't make one kid better than the other, but you can look at the kids, you know the kids, you know, the ones who are starting the businesses, or the ones who are running out campaigning, and you know, versus the ones who are hanging out at books and books and reading books. You know, it's a very different student. So the application reflects as such. So we'll talk a little while as far as how do we understand colleges, how do we get to know colleges, and then how do we determine our fit. The next thing that really I feel has confused families a lot, and even confuses me as a mother, are these extracurricular activities. And I do agree that they are of very high importance. I mean, it's through the extracurricular activities that students can really show who they are, right? They can really differentiate themselves. And right now there's so many activities for kids to choose from that it's really can get overwhelming. And kids can spend all their time playing sports, or everything has gotten to a much higher level than when the adults in this room were in high school, right? We might have played a sport for a couple hours a day or whatever, but now, you know, if you want to, let's say, play tennis in college, or you want to play soccer in college, most of my students who do that are half days. Like, they can't even go a full day of school. I mean, the level of commitment is just so much higher, and it's getting more and more and more. So they are of importance, but what I say is that colleges love students with diverse interests and goals. Keep in mind that whatever activity you participate in, colleges want to see a deep level of involvement and a true contribution. So you can be involved in athletics, creative arts, student government, speech and debate, internships. It really doesn't matter. My favorite student applicants over the last few years, one girl was really into trapeze. It was pretty cool. We got to write a whole essay about trapeze. Another kid who did magic, and he did all these magic tricks, and we videoed it on the application. That was pretty cool. And the other thing is when he did his magic, he was so excited about it. You know, so sometimes you talk to these kids and like, yeah, I do community service, and here are my number of hours, and it's like, you really don't care about this, do you? And they're like, no, I really don't. And that's hard. Not only do I feel like, once again, they've wasted their time, but they wasted their time because they didn't really spend the time doing what they love. And I don't think the trapeze artist is going to grow up and become a trapeze artist, but she did, I think, learn valuable lessons as far as pursuing passions. She still stayed healthy. She charted her own course. And quite frankly, she got into Vanderbilt, so she did just fine. The next thing is demonstrated interest. So one of the big changes now from college admissions and when we were applying is there's something called the Common Application. So now it's really easy to apply to a lot of colleges, and it's really a click of the button and suddenly you've applied to another school. So what I always say to students is say, on the margin, just apply, right? I mean, there's no downside to clicking the button. The problem that the colleges have is how do they know who's a real applicant, who's just clicking the button, right? So as a student, you need to what's called demonstrate interest. What you don't want to be on the flip side is what's called a phantom applicant, where they've never heard of you, you've never come to anything, you've never given them your name, and then suddenly they get the application. 9 times out of 10, they're going to assume there's no real interest here, or oh, this is just a safety school. It's interesting. I have kids who get into Ivy League schools and then don't get into like lower tier schools, and it's really because those schools think, oh, this kid's never going to come. And they're probably right, but if the student had just demonstrated some interest, maybe the school wouldn't have said that. So what are some ways that you can demonstrate interest? Well, you can certainly, so when colleges go to your high school, so colleges travel and go to the high school, it's so interesting how few kids go to those things, right? I mean, the kid has to walk down the hall to go to this thing, and the poor guy from the college has to like fly down and stay in some Fleabag hotel and schlep to the high school and sit there in some crazy cafeteria with all this. I mean, it's a terrible, day for this person. And the kids don't even walk down the aisle to go to the session. So I really want the kids to understand that these are important sessions. And then also you can go visit the school, of course. If you go visit, please try to sign in. If you can interview, please interview. If you are interviewed, make sure you know something about the school. I used to interview for Penn, and inevitably when I'd ask a child, why do you want to go to Penn? They'd say, well, it's an Ivy League school. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's not a reason. I mean, it is a reason, but it's not. I mean, not a reason that I want you. It's like, tell me what do I offer you, and have you done any homework? So that's demonstrated interest. Another piece is counselor and teacher recommendations. A lot of kids blow those off and think, oh, I'll just send it to my counselor and he or she will write something nice. Now counselors don't even have to write anything. So I used to be a counselor in the school, and I really tried to write things, but I had plenty of peers that wouldn't write anything. So you want to get to know your counselor at your high school and 2 teachers who can write nice things about you. Interviews, I actually say, are medium to low importance unless you're meeting with an admissions officer. If you're meeting with like an adult, or an alumni, those are pretty worthless. Not to blow them or to do a terrible job at them, but for the most part, the colleges can't discern, which alumni is actually legitimate versus which alumni is, just doing this because they're bored or whatever it might be, in which case I think they take alumni interviews with a grain of salt, whereas admissions officers who actually make the admissions decisions, those can be extremely important. Your senior year grades, I think, are super high importance as far as the first semester. After the first semester, from there, it doesn't really matter anymore. So take those hard classes and then enjoy the second half of your senior year. And then responding on time, I think, is very important. So one thing kids love to do is to wait till the last minute. I think there is a huge advantage to applying to schools early. Not just early as far as early decision, regular decision, but early as far as this is due November 1st, I'm going to send it in, October 1st or September 15th. And if you think about it, there's a human being on the other side. There isn't a robot. So that human being is going to be happier reading this stuff at the beginning of the year than at the end. And maybe that's the way it should be and all the rest of it, but there still is a human being over there. I think it says something when if you send it in at 12 o'clock on the day it's due, it sends a message. So trying to get things in earlier is important. A couple additional factors. So if you're an underrepresented applicant, so colleges really crave diversity. One of the advantages that a lot of South Florida students have is if you're Hispanic, right? I went to Beach High. There were only 2 kids in my whole elementary school that were not pulled out for speaking Spanish. I was one of them. But I was the minority. They were the minorities when it came to applying to college, right? So colleges still really crave minority applicants. Some colleges more than others, right? University of Miami, I don't think could care. Schools in Texas, California. But if you're willing to consider a school in Ohio or North Carolina or Virginia, the chances for Hispanic applicants certainly go up. In-state versus out-of-state students, for example, getting into school at UF, much harder in-state than out-of-state, right? And that's true at certain schools. So If you apply to, I have a student this year applying to University of Washington. I'm pretty sure she's going to get in. I've never had a student apply to University of Washington, so that's exciting. And I don't know how many Floridians apply to University of Washington. So so applying to unusual schools or schools that your peers don't normally apply to. When students come in, I can usually guess what 7 schools they're going to give me as their first choices before we start to explore more schools. And so, colleges are looking for diversity. Legacy status, so where your parents went to school, matters a lot. Once again, whether it should or should not is another conversation, but it does matter if you have a child. If you went to Brown and your kid wants to go to Brown, yes, on the margin, that can make a difference. Donations can make a difference. They go through a different pile when you make a big enough donation, so certainly you can consider that if you can. Special talents, so if you have a special talent, like you're a great musician or an athlete or do writing or photography, all schools are trying to fill their sports teams, they're trying to fill their orchestras, they're filling their bands, they're filling all of those clubs. So if you're able to do something, you definitely want to make sure that the school knows that you can do it, right? So you want to reach out to that coach, you want to reach out to that band lead or whatever it might be, and getting a letter from, or a nod from that coach or band lead can make a big difference. Certain sports, South Floridians naturally do well in because of where we are. So swimming, water polo, sailing, crew, aren't as actively played in other parts of the country. So that can be a big advantage. And that leads me to recruited athletes, which certainly can make a big difference. Before I turn it over to questions, I just want to turn my attention for one more second to choosing the college list. Because really out of all those things I mentioned, with the exceptions of grades and test scores, I think is what really differentiates who gets into an Ivy League school and who doesn't, because it's the fit of your child with the fit of the school. So as far as picking a school, once again, because we're located in South Florida, we can't just get in the car. The first thing I ask families to do is to hop on the internet and just start exploring the different colleges. There are 4,500 colleges in the U.S., 4,500 colleges. So every person in here's child will get into college. There is no doubt, right? No doubt, especially if you can pay full price. They probably can get into, 4,000 of them at least. So there are plenty of schools. You might, and then from there, whether or not a school is for you, I think first has to do with taking an intake of what's important to you as a family, right? So I have families that come in my office and say, I want this school to be 1 plane flight away. That's very important to me. Fine, okay, so that takes away certain schools. I once had a girl who just cared about the size of the gym. Fine. Some students say, I really want to do pre-med, or I really want biology department, I want to study aviation, I want to study geology. So, you can start getting rid of schools that way. Some families are very concerned about safety. Some definitely want a big Jewish presence. Some want a big Christian presence. I don't think it's up to anyone but the family to decide what's important to them, and then from there, just start going through the colleges. Quick note about college rankings. I don't like college rankings in the sense that people say, oh, this school is number 10, therefore it's better. Because as those of us who've been in the business know, these rankings change every year, in which case, you don't want to make a decision based on 2014 only to have that change, the next year. I think the rankings are good as far as giving you an initial overview of where things are, but whether or not a school is number 7 or number 11, I think really shouldn't be the differentiating factor. So, you can look at some of the rankings. I would going back to take advantage of the college visits to high school. At every high school I know, kids are able to go to those in 9th and 10th grade. They don't have to wait till 11th and 12th grade. So students can go, there's no pressure, listen to what the school has to say. There are college information sessions. Okay, this is something that families always find interesting. So a lot of times these Ivy League schools will come to South Florida, right? And certain kids get invited and certain kids don't. And of course, the kids who get invited, the parents think, well, that's because my son is so wonderful, right? those kids get invited because those kids somewhere at some time registered on that school's website or gave their name to that school or something. There is no eye in the sky that knows anything about your child. There is no website that says your child has a 4.0 at ransom or your child has a 2.0 at ransom or at Beach High or at NMB or whatever it might be. No idea. So you want to make sure that you register on the school websites for schools of interest so you know when they come to town and they know that you're a student that's interested in you. And then I also say ask around, right? I know I ended up at the University of Pennsylvania because there was a girl a year ahead of me who I really liked and she was going there. And I was like, oh, okay, if she's going there, it must be a good school. And that's not the worst way to start putting together a list, right? Is to talk to people that you respect and see what they think about different schools. And then if you can, I would say the best thing is to visit the schools. Those families who have the money and have the time, try to visit schools. I'm here with my girls and they will tell you when you go on vacation, we always go visit colleges, right? It's not that big of a deal, and you walk on campus and you really can get a feel for the school and just get the vibe and find out what's going on and what the school is excited about, even if it's just the size. Even for some of the younger kids, if you go and the kid likes, let's say, BU or NYU, they say, okay, well, they like urban schools or I want a small campus school, and then you can sort of start, Xing things out. And then the last thing is also do a reality check, right? So it's really great when I have a family who walks in and says, my child wants to go to Harvard. And then I look at their list and I'm like, or their grades and test scores, and I'm like, I can't do this. Like nobody on the earth can do this. And it just means that the grades and scores don't correlate. And once again, these are colleges, so they are looking for baseline grades and test scores. But then from there, if you can find the right match for your child, usually they get in, right? So if you've matched your child's academic interests, your family's interests, their academic profile with the college, it doesn't have to be this crazy stressful process. It's just about finding the right fit for you and your family and your child. And with that, I just wanted to open up questions. Yes, go ahead.
Does it help if they apply in the summer programs that they have for high school students?
That's a good question. It depends on the college, right? So one of the things is colleges are not daft to the idea that only wealthier families can usually go to these things, and they're usually pretty expensive. Some of them, though, happen to be run by the college, and what I say to the kid is if you can do really well and the professor from the college can get to know you, then the professor at that college's letter recommendation is going to carry a lot more weight than your high school math teacher, right? But a lot of them are just taught by other professors. They're taught by outside people. They just use the facilities on the campus. So you need to do some research. And then there are some summer programs that are very selective where the colleges are really looking for students. Usually those are a lot less expensive, right? So like the MIT MITES program, the Cornell Curie programs, the ones that are really hard to get into and really inexpensive are usually pretty powerful because the school puts those in place to actually recruit kids as compared to the other way around. But I'm not a big fan of expensive, fancy summer programs.
For SAT prep, is it better to go to a group, one of those institutions, or to have a private tutor?
Yeah, that's a good question. It really depends. So if your child is an Ivy League type student, it's going to be really hard for him or her to sit in a group setting with other kids of his level, and that's the truth. So you might be better off doing a private session because otherwise they're going to be wasting their time, right? I mean, there's a big difference in going from 750 to 800 and 400 to 450, which where most kids are. So, so I think it depends on the kid. I think if you can afford it, a private tutor is a great way to go for SAT prep because at the end of the day, it is an important test. Once again, I didn't make the system, but it is pretty important. Yeah. Sorry, I had the guy in the back then. Yeah.
A comment about one of the things that you said you didn't really think it was worth much was seeing a local alum. I'd just be careful about that, especially those of us who are down here trying to recruit for a college like Tufts or Colgate, and they have a very active alum program that has a direct connection to the Dean of Admissions. So there are some of those where the local visits can be particularly key, as a matter of fact, and this idea of either coming from Florida to upstate New York or to Washington, or if you want to study geology and you may not be able to get in, you go to Colorado School of Mines from here you see if you deal with it, and if you do, great, and then life can change after that.
Right. You're right. I was speaking more to the Ivy schools. The Ivy schools have a pretty extensive network that it's just, at this point, it's very unwieldy, and there's so many of alumni interviewers out there. And as someone I was actually president of the Penn Club down here for quite a few years. And, just because you go to Ivy League school doesn't make you sane. I mean, so some of the interviewers were, some of the things we'd see were, so, from that, it also helps the student to feel, okay, even if I met someone who wasn't exactly totally all there, that it's okay and I can still get in school. I agree, a school like Colgate might be better at cherry picking who's actually doing the interviewing as compared to, oh, you went to Colgate, slap, meet some kids.
Where they get it from the admissions department, and we're trying to sell both the kid and the parents.
Right,
Which
for a school like Colgate. Right, Colgate's amazing, and not that many kids from down here apply. Unfortunately, and not enough students apply. They should have more apply. I love Colgate. Yeah.
Great job. So I agree with about 99% of what you just said. I take slight umbrage with the one area in which we disagree. I'd like you to elaborate on that, because you said the ACT is a superior exam to the SAT. And in the experience in my tutoring business, and we do both, those students who master the SAT are far more intellectual and tend to go to better schools, frankly, and become better citizens of society than those who master the ACT. That's my experience over maybe 400 students. So why in particular did you make that comment?
I've never heard the connection between the better citizen of society who does better on the SAT, but I'm curious to hear it. I don't know. I've never seen that before. To me, it seems that the ACT is just a test that the kids can study for. And it seems like, no offense to your research, but the SAT agrees with me in that they're changing their test to look more like the ACT. That the SAT is just not keeping up with the times as far as the kids. But it's fine. I mean, at the end of the day, for everyone's purpose, it really doesn't matter which one you do better on, right? It really doesn't. If you do better on the SAT, fabulous. If you do better on the ACT, fabulous. I don't think the colleges care which one. They're just looking for that score. So at the end of the day, just do what works, and that's great. That's yeah.
I actually have a 5-year-old son.
All right.
So, first question I want to ask is, does the high school that he will attend, does that make a difference? Is it more advantageous for him to go to Pinecrest than it is for him to go to Miami South?
Sure.
Number one. Number two, if you were making this presentation 10, 15 years from now, how might it change? Given how things are evolving, different kinds of tests, different sort of measurements.
It's a good question. I'll say one of the biggest, so why don't I start with the first question? It really depends on the child. So the reason I wrote this book is to let families know that you don't have to go to a Pinecrest in order to get into a good school, that you can go to all kinds of schools. And it really depends on your kid. And what I thought the differentiator was that, well, my children go to Pinecrest and they're smiling. There are, 7 college counselors at those kind of schools for 100 kids. I mean, they really believe in private counseling, right? You go to Beach High, where I went, there are 2,400 kids and one amazing college counselor, right? So it's a hard thing to compete with. But I work with fabulous kids who go to public schools, who go to private schools, and it really depends on you getting to know your child and what they needs and what their needs are. I mean, if you're fortunate enough to be able to pay for a private school, then you can compare, what might be. But I think it really, and there are a lot of really bad private schools out there, and just like there are really bad public schools out there. Right? I mean, so just because it's private doesn't make it better. That I know too. So it depends more on the child and where they're going to thrive than the name of the high school. I firmly believe. I mean, assuming it's a good high school, right, and not a not good high school, which exists on both ends of the spectrum. And the second one, as far as 10 years, the thing that I'm hoping is going to change is that college right now is really expensive. I mean, and it's almost, prohibitive to the middle class, right? So the very, very rich people, it's great. The very, very poor people, it's fine. You get financial aid. But the people in the middle, I mean, $60,000 a year, that's a lot of money. So I would say that's the biggest reason why the public, the state public schools are exploding, and they get amazing kids because they can't afford the other piece, I think. Yeah.
I have a question. I was homeschooling him,
Oh, yeah.
and I decided to put him to school now. But I'm thinking in the future, maybe I consider, going back to homeschooling. And I know a lot of parents who are looking for an alternative like homeschool. And my question is, the colleges, the Ivy League, they give some special attention to homeschoolers, or it's just?
Yeah, it's getting more common homeschool, and they actually have separate applications sometimes for homeschool students. They're pretty strict now as far as the requirements. Now with Florida Virtual School, they can really get a Florida public education from home. So I don't know how you're planning on doing homeschool, but if you can stick to a Florida public curriculum and have them pass the Florida tests, I would say that for homeschool students, those standardized tests are more important than they might be for other students, because they need so for example, if you take an AP test, they'd really want to see how he does. But now with Florida Virtual School, it's definitely exploding, the homeschool, and I think if you stick with that curriculum, you'll be okay. But otherwise, I would look on, if you're thinking of doing it and applying to an Ivy League school online, they have the list of requirements for the homeschool students.
Yeah, because I want him to have, like I said, in music, for example. I teach music and piano, so we are trying to, I want to give him that, advantage, so with the clarinet, for example, because he can get in that. I did that. I had a scholarship through me playing the clarinet. I got into FIU. I graduated with my master, not that.
Right.
No $1. So I want to give him that advantage, and I think the homeschoolers have a little bit more time to dedicate to get good at something. So that's
Sure. Although we have the New World School of the Arts not too far from here. The kids do pretty extraordinary coming out of there.
That's a very good high school, like at the top high school in.
It's a good high school if you like the arts. Otherwise, it's a terrible high school, right?
Okay.
But that's what I mean. It's if you like the arts, that's an extraordinary high school. If you love music, man,
But
you're.
it's not a good idea from New World School of the Arts to go to a top college like this, because it depends if they are
From
there.
any of those high schools, sure, they can go from New World to Harvard. Absolutely.
But only to study arts or to study something?
No, anything they want. I worked with the valedictorian of New World a couple of years ago, and she went to NYU to study dance, but she got into a lot of academic programs. I mean, she did very well. She was a smart kid.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to address the issue regarding the ACT and the SAT. My experience was that a lot of colleges they don't really go by the high SAT. For example, at Harvard, 50% of the people who get perfect SAT scores get rejected, don't get in. And the SAT, on the other hand, has a much higher correlation, I find, with the SAT-2 scores. So we got a kid who took let's say, the SAT-2 in chemistry. He's more likely to get a higher ACT score than an SAT score, and the colleges really prefer those students. So there's really an advantage to taking the ACT, and you really can study for the ACT, because that really what the ACT scores indicate is a serious student. The SAT is a smart aleck type of student. And a lot of those Ivy League schools don't like the smart aleck student. You have to show, all kinds of other things like commitment to your community, and it's totally the opposite of what the gentleman was saying. That's been my experience. I mean, the kids who get high ACT scores do have a greater grasp of the community and do a lot more.
Well, in my defense, you need a much more vast vocabulary to master the SAT. And people with better vocabulary naturally have better communicative skills, naturally become, or more conducive to becoming leaders, speakers, writers. And I can tell you my students who master, listen, they all do well in life, relatively speaking. Those who master the SAT become the real leaders in society.
I tend to totally disagree with you.
That's a politically correct
I'm
statement,
just
but
gonna
I
say
understand.
that, to be honest, I hate the ACT and the SAT. I personally don't. So my husband did better in the SAT than I did. I don't know who's doing better in life right now, but like, source of contention in our house. At the end of the day, it's a test, right? But the colleges care about it, and so whichever one. I don't want the child's high school life to be about the test. That's how I think. Like, we put enough pressure on our kids anyway. This is one darn test. Is it important? Absolutely. I honestly think colleges care whether it's the SAT or ACT? I really don't. So whichever one you can do to get it as fast as possible, fabulous, so that the kids can spend their time on other stuff.
Everything in the application has to be consistent.
Sure, consistency is very important.
If there's one is out of whack, they'll show what on earth is going on here. This doesn't jive.
Right.
What's wrong with this picture?
Yeah. And you know, once again, this conversation is about Ivy League schools. So if there are 4,500 colleges out there, you know, there aren't 4,500 Ivy League schools. So for those students, it is very important. But there are plenty of schools now who aren't even accepting the ACT or the SAT. I mean, that's a big, so that might be one of the changes in 10 years, is that we don't have the SAT or the ACT. I mean, really good schools like Smith and Bryn Mawr. What other schools this year are going SAT optional? Well, University of Miami will do it for international students. American University is test optional now. Hobart and William Smith. I mean, you have like really good brand name colleges who have turned their backs on it. And from what they say, that there's, you know, applicant body isn't any worse for it. But as of right now, so when I look at students and I'm like, I didn't make the rules, you still got to do this darn test, and sorry about that. Yeah. But a lot of other things can make up for it. You know, the kids who are great writers or actors or musicians or just passionate intellectual people. I always say, I'll get to you in a second. I always say to my students, I like when kids read the newspaper because you can always tell in their essays and their conversations as to whether or not they're worldly. I would say that the worldliness and what comes out of the child's mouth and what they think about their essays can make up for a lot. Yes?
What do you recommend about the advanced placement tests for kids?
Well, I think if your school offers them, you should take them. I think that's a good indication of whether or not the kids actually know the subject matter. The Ivy League schools ask for the AP scores. The Florida public schools, a lot of the public schools don't ask for them. So one of the disadvantages the Florida public school kids might have, if you're applying to the Ivy League school, for example, is that they put a lot of kids into AP classes that probably shouldn't be there. Because for the Florida schools, it helps just to take the class. It doesn't really matter whether or not you got a good grade. Whereas the Ivy League schools are asking you for your grade, so it really matters. So it's just important that the kids know that the scores do matter depending on your level of school. Yeah.
Are they really the IB programs or the Cambridge programs in high school helping students in order to get to good colleges?
What do you mean by the IB?
IB program?
Oh, the IB, yeah.
And the Cambridge program.
Yeah. I love those curriculum. I mean, it's all about learning, right? So they're different curriculum. The IB curriculum is a really cool curriculum for the right kid, right? So it's an international baccalaureate curriculum. It's curriculum used all over the world. It's very global. It makes the kids write an awful lot, which if you like to write and you like to learn, man, it's amazing. I still like the AP curriculum. You know, they take the test. There's more, I would say, like selection of classes the kids can take. So there's psychology and there's, you know, environmental science and all that stuff, which isn't in the IB curriculum as a broken out class. So they're all good. I think there's a lot of like marketing hype around them. So schools will get them because parents then think that they're better programs or better schools. But at the end of the day, AB, IP, ACE, Cambridge, those are well-proven curriculum. And once again, it has to do with your child. If your child wants to go to Ivy League school in any of those environments, just doing the best they can, taking the most rigorous schedule, taking the IB or AP exams, and then they can, you know, succeed.
They will measure the same? I mean, if you get all APs in high school, or in order to choose what high school should I choose in order to get a better college, would be an AP kind of or IB?
Yeah, they're looking for how a student does in the context of their high school, right? So if you're at an IB school, they're not going to expect you to take AP exams. If you're an AP school, they're not going to expect you to take IB school. So it's all in the context of high school. I used to be a counselor at a high school where we only offered 2 AP exams. Well, so what was the valedictorian only took 2, right? I mean, they got into Ivy League schools. So it's really about how you do in the context of your school, which goes back to your question, is how is your child going to fare in the context of your school? And then, you know, going back to your point is what kind of human being are we developing, right? So do we think at the end of the day, if they come out of, you know, terrible high school here, but they're valedictorian versus this high school here, you know, what kind of person are they? You know, where are their values? Where is it beyond the grades and the test scores? Because I think that shines through also. Oh, yeah?
I was reading your book title,
Oh,
and it
good.
says how to get into a top school without top dollar resources.
Yeah.
I didn't hear much about that in your presentation.
Sure, yes. Well, I meant by going to public school that you didn't have to pay for a private. So a lot of people assume that if I have to go to a private school in order to get in. Although in this book, I do gear it towards families that don't have a ton of money. So we talk all about less expensive colleges, ways for kids to get scholarships. We talk about things like fee waivers, so you don't have to pay for applications. There's fee waivers, so you don't have to pay for the SAT or the ACT. There are all kinds of ways. What I want to make sure that families understand is that you do not need a ton of money to get into these schools if you do know what you're doing. So they're actually actively looking for families without tons of money. And things, and it's in the book, and I could have, so yes, fee waivers exist for almost everything. There are also free classes for test prep. There are free, there's free summer programs that the colleges are actively recruiting kids, and a lot of that's in here. And then there are just less expensive colleges. There are free colleges. One of my favorite colleges, unfortunately, went 50% tuition now. Cooper Union, which is in New York, which for years was free. Now, unfortunately, it's 50%, but still 50%, which is a lot better than, NYU. And it could be argued that Cooper Union kids do really well. If no one's going to not give you the job because you came out of Cooper Union. But it's also, one building in Manhattan, so it might not be fabulous for every student. But yeah, that's in here. But that was the genesis. Yeah.
Do you cover scholarships?
I do. Yeah, I cover a lot of scholarships in here. My trick for getting scholarships is what I say to students is that when I say, well, who do you think gets scholarships? I always ask the kids, and the answer is it's the kids who apply for scholarships, right? I heard a number, and I don't know if it's true because I've never counted it, but someone once told me there are 180,000 scholarships. I might be forced to believe that. Our company has a scholarship, and it's kind of funny because we work with hundreds of kids all over the world, and some years we'll get like one application. And the kids are like, oh, it's only $250. I'm like, okay, but it's still $250, So I know in the scheme of the price of college that these little scholarships might not matter, but over time they add up. It also looks really good, I think, on a college application to say I won the McDonald's scholarship, I won the Coca-Cola scholarship, those kind of things look nice. But the biggest scholarships come from the colleges themselves. So one of the disadvantages disadvantage of Ivy League schools, they don't offer merit scholarships, right? So if anyone tells you their child got a full ride to to Princeton, they're lying, okay? I'm just telling you right now. That's one of the fundamental premises of the Ivy League school. They don't give merit scholarships. They do give great need-based scholarships, great financial aid, amazing financial aid. Those are the places to go if you get eligible financial aid. But if you are a child, middle class, and you don't want to pay $60,000, if your child can get into Harvard, quite frankly, they can get a full ride at University of Miami, or a full ride at Tulane, or a full ride at maybe even Tufts, or a full ride at BU. And then it's up to the family to kind of decide which one they want to do. But the school scholarships are the biggest ones, with the exception of the Ivies that don't give merit scholarships. Yeah.
I apologize, I didn't do my homework about your background. You talk about your company. Sounds like you're an individual counselor, but it sounds now like you're more than that.
More than that. Sure, I'm more than an individual counselor.
Well, is your company beyond you?
Yes, we have 5 offices. We represent students in 13 countries. So we work with kids all over the world trying to come to school in the U.S.
Just an interesting thing. I've spent a lot of time in the last number of years working with people between schools in the West Grove, of which there are a variety, and then this program that they've come up with for the summer studies, and I think it just changed its name, but it used to be called Summerbridge. And the kids in the wealthier schools, elite schools, whatever we want to call them, end up with a book for whichever of these tests, right? Well, these kids have decided rather than just chuck them in the trash after they're through, they need to collect these things and give them to whoever may be trying to get through that process to kids in schools that don't provide that piece to it. So if you're dealing with schools like that, there's a lot of
resources. And the counselors in Dade County Public Schools are amazing. I've never met one who's not phenomenal. But they're just limited in time. So a lot of times it depends on the child to actually come and solicit the support as compared to, them being sought out of 800 kids for that counselor to know that student. Yeah. Any more questions? I guess time is, one more, yeah?
Go ahead.
My question is, how many of your clients are applying to graduate schools? Since I know a lot of this was catered to undergrad, but I'm well beyond that.
Okay. Well, my book is focused on undergrad, which I think is why it's an undergrad crowd. We do graduate school as well as a company, but fewer, I think, students seek out graduate school support. It just is the nature of it. But yeah, well, we do graduate school too. I can give you my card if anyone wants my card. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, folks, if there are no more questions, then we have the book for sale at the counter over there. Mandee's going to be signing over there at the little table to the left of the podium. Reminder for our internet audience watching at home, there's still time for you to call the number on your screen, get a book signed, and we'll ship it to wherever you are in the U.S. free of charge. Also a reminder that all of our live stream events are archived. So if you don't have the chance to watch it live, you could go to the Books and Books website, go to the live streaming link, and any author appearance that we've had here at the store will be saved there for you to watch at your convenience. And for those of you here in the house, let's just give Mandee another hand. Thanks very much. All right.